Hi everyone, my name is Joshua Mugler. I'm the Curator of Islamic Manuscripts at the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library. And I'd like to talk to you today about a manuscript in our collections that is a copy of a book that claims that it is very dangerous, and in fact that kings used to keep it hidden away from their own sons and their own inner circles because they were so worried about the consequences of others having access to it. Now this book in particular is a medical book, but specifically on the topic of poisons and antidotes to those poisons. You can probably imagine some reasons why a king might be worried about powerful people in his kingdom having too much information about poisons, things that might be used to take power if they were used in the right way. The book here tells us that this is something that you need to take seriously, especially if you're in a position of power. This book comes from the context of ancient India, actually. It is attributed to this great Indian scholar named Chanakya, who lived around the 4th to 3rd centuries BCE. And historically, Chanakya, also known as Kautilya, he's primarily known for writing a major work on political science and economics. But there's also a legend about him that says that in his service as a major advisor to one of the kings of northern India at the time, he would give the king small doses of poisons each night in order to, so not to harm the king, but to help the king build up an immunity to these poisons so that he would be safe from attempts on his life. This is a plot point you may be familiar with from the film The Princess Bride. But in any case, there's an old legend that Chanakya was doing this, and that might be the reason why someone would attribute this book on poisons to him, if he was known for having this connection and expertise in the field. This book was presumably written in Sanskrit or another ancient Indian language, and was translated first into Persian, or some variety of Persian, under the sponsorship of a very prominent person named Yahya ibn Khalid, who was a member of the Barmakid family. And the Barmakids were a very, very powerful family in the early Islamic Caliphate in Baghdad, but their origins were from Balkh, which is now in Afghanistan. And they were actually, shortly before this, had been a very prominent Buddhist family in that region. And so they had a lot of connections to Central Asia and also to South Asia and to the sort of historic homelands of the Buddhist tradition. And so they used some of these connections to bring Indian scholars to Baghdad in the late 8th century CE, including one doctor named Manka. And when they brought Manka to Baghdad and he was sort of treating one of the caliphs, Harun al-Rashid, a very famous caliph, he apparently made them aware of this old book on poisons, and they thought that it would be pretty valuable to have. And so Yahya ibn Khalid sponsored a translation of this work into Persian. And the book actually tells us that Manka translated it into Persian, but another man named Abu Hatem of Balkh was the one who actually wrote it down. So it seems that Manka knew some Persian, but maybe was not completely fluent or didn't know how to write it. And so you have sort of a team effort that shows how a little glimpse into the translation process and how these different sort of cultural backgrounds might be brought together so that they could use the strength of each one to create a really fluent Persian translation. Now, just a few decades later, in the early 9th century, another caliph named al-Ma'mun was undertaking a lot of translation projects into Arabic. And there's a lot of scholarly attention given to translations of ancient Greek philosophy and science and medicine and all of these things, often through Syriac and generally done by Christian scholars in Baghdad. But there's a little less attention to works from the Indian tradition that were also translated into Arabic around the same time. And this is a good example, this book on poisons attributed to Chanakya. So al-Ma'mun had this translated from Persian into Arabic by another man named Abbas ibn Sa'id al-Jawhari. Now, this manuscript in particular that's in our collection has this lovely inscription at the top of the title page, which you can see on the top right here. And it's written in a sort of gold ink with beautiful little red and blue vowel markings. And it tells us that it was created for the library of Nuruddin Arslan Shah I, who was the emir of the city of Mosul in northern Iraq around the year 1200 CE. So it doesn't tell us why he thought that this was a valuable addition to his collection, but we know that he and his relatives had been establishing a variety of hospitals and schools in the region, and so maybe they thought this was a good thing to have in that context. So this manuscript that we're looking at that's in the collections of the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, it comes from the city of Mosul around 1200 or so. And we know from these seals on the left side that the manuscript later belonged to Mustafa Sidka, who was a prominent Ottoman mathematician around the 18th century. He would always stamp these two seals together on his manuscripts, which he built up quite an impressive collection of manuscripts, and many of them were on scientific themes like this. But the small one at the top simply says, this is God's will, there's no power except through God. The one at the bottom that's larger tells you more about his name and identifies him and gives a date. So we don't know what happened between 1200 and the 18th century, but Mustafa Sidka came across this manuscript and added it to his collections at that time. And it now belongs to the Khalidi Library, which is in Jerusalem, in the old city of Jerusalem, along with several other manuscripts from Mustafa Sidka's collection. This is manuscript number 263. You can read more about it at their website. They have a whole page devoted to this manuscript, although it is in Arabic. But it's a really impressive manuscript, especially on the title page here. Very lovely calligraphy ornamenting the top and bottom, as you can see. And if you would like to view the entire manuscript, you can see it, of course, on our website at vhimmel.org. You've got the project number here. But I really just think that this manuscript has this really long story to tell, reaching all the way back almost 2,500 years into South Asia, and then showing the really rich cultural connections that were so valuable to the Islamic scholarship that became such a vast and really rich enterprise, starting in the early Islamic period and really continuing, as you can see, with this manuscript coming centuries after the text was first translated. So I think there's a really just a really fascinating story to tell here, with travels from South Asia to Afghanistan to Iraq to northern Iraq and Mosul to Istanbul in the 18th century, and now to Jerusalem, and now, of course, being made digitally available anywhere around the world. So I leave you with some information on Himmel's mission and contact information, and I invite if you have any questions or want to know more about our Islamic collections, please feel free to contact me. My information is on the staff page there, and I would be very happy to hear from you. So thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.